So I was recently browsing YouTube and I came across this video by Goodgis. Goodgis? I think that's how you pronounce that. In which they set out to create a game in 1 hour. I left a comment under the video saying I'd like to give something like this a go, and they replied back telling me I should. So I did. The idea of the challenge, for those who don't know, is that you can come up with a basic idea beforehand, then you've got 1 hour to see how far you can get in the project, with the aim to have a complete loop and a sort of complete game. And then you could take another hour on top of that to add a bit more polish. I started as always by opening up a new project in Unity and getting all the relevant packages installed. I've not done a huge amount of 2D projects, but I figured 2D was the way to go here for this, as a 1 hour time frame is quite limiting, and 3D just adds another dimension of complexity. The basic idea I had was that you were this little orb that would move around, and you would have other orbs that span around you, and you'd use these to take out the enemies that were chasing you. And the goal would be to just survive as long as you could. So I got to work making the artwork and getting a rigid body controller together to control the player and make some enemies that would chase the player. A huge part of this process was spent finding a way to procedurally generate the orbs in a circle around the player. So I didn't actually progress as far as I would have liked to by the end of this first hour. I'm terrible at maths, and I mean, just look at this bit of code. It's got pi coming out of the wazoo. But as with all code problems, if you look hard enough, there's always an obscure forum you can yoink some genius mathematicians' work from. By the end of the first hour though, I did have most of what I set out to do, in that there was a rigid body controlled player, enemies would spawn and chase the player, and there was some orbs that span around. And after that, that was kind of done, but it was a little bit lacking. There was no indication as to your health or score in this first build, so for the second hour I implemented a little bit of a nicer level design, added a HUD and some music, and this is how that turned out. As you can notice, the character moves so slowly. I'm not sure why I didn't fix this before making the build. This is the way it's set in stone forever now. Having built this out, I could have left it there and gone about my day having completed the challenge. But where would the fun in that be? I ended up falling into a coding dreamlike state. Just one more thing, now I'll fix this, and then bam, it was the end of the day. But I had something I was quite happy with. In terms of changes, I just added some fun sound effects to the enemies as they bumped into each other. Some particles and post-processing were added to give it that juice. I changed the core mechanic to be about gaining enough speed to cut through enemies, and the orbs were just then more of a power-up which you could actually fire out. I slapped a main menu and some basic information on the front and figured that was great and I would call it a day. Challenge not just completed, but exceeded. I'd made a pretty fun game in just 1 day, but what would it look like after 1 week? Oh, for the love of gut. So the following day I booted up the projects after work and spent a couple more hours polishing. I designed a bit more of a level instead of a big empty room. I put in some speed boost pads that would speed the player up and help them reach what I was referring to as terminal velocity a lot quicker. Terminal velocity meaning that when you reach that speed you could cut through the enemies. I also added in another ability, which is this shockwave that would push the enemies back as they would quite quickly surround you and make you unable to move. On day 3 I continued with some more juice stuff by adding some particles to the player, sound effects when the player got hit, these bounce pads that would bounce you away, and also a new type of enemy that would remain stationary but fire bullets out towards the player. The player could cut through the bullets, but an issue with the sprite layers meant that these sometimes were invisible in the build that I now have. The big thing though on day 3 was implementing an XP system along with the ability to purchase upgrades for your little smiley boy. These would, decrease the charge time of your abilities or give you more health, etc. Putting the UI for this together was a bit of a pain, but I got it working in the end. And I was using scriptable objects to save the states of the upgrades, which worked fine in the editor, but it was after sending this build out to a friend that I realized something that I'm embarrassed I didn't know sooner. Scriptable objects don't save data in a built version of the game. So day 4, the first point of order was to rewrite my saving mechanics to be an actual saving mechanic and not using scriptable objects. I swapped this all over to saving out a JSON file instead of relying on the scriptable object, and then I put a lot of bug fixing work together to make sure this all worked okay, and that it would load and save the data when it needed to be used and refresh this stat panel here. Also, up to this point, the game was running at around 220 frames per second, and it would make even my 3080 produce god-awful coil whine. So I implemented an options menu with a settable FPS and a VSync option, as there was also a lot of screen tearing happening. Day 5 was more of the same, a few more bits of flair and polish and balancing to try out and get the movement speed feeling good, and tweaking the XP progression and flow and bug fixing with some of the save load stuff that I just hadn't caught the first time around. In this time I'd also been playing a lot of the fantastic Death's Door, and when you're dying to get that game you get this big death screen coming up. And I've been struggling to make the player defeat in my game impactful, so I implemented the same mechanic into this game. Hey. So that brings us on to day 6/7. Unfortunately, I didn't get a huge amount of work done on day 6, so I didn't have a specific day 6 build. Aside from just more balancing stuff, I mainly just added the ability to control the volume of the music as it was getting annoying when I was playtesting it. I gave the game out at this point to my mate who did more testing for me and threw some more bugs my way, which was, you know, that's fine. This is fine. But I squashed them and it's now day 7 and I'm typing up this devlog script. As well as writing up the script, I got to work uploading the builds to itch along with putting up some artwork. I used the name Smiley Boy as a placeholder throughout this whole thing, but I don't actually have an affinity for the name. I don't particularly like it. I'd love to know if you've got any ideas for a better name in the comments below. I was thinking Terminal Velocity, but I think that's a bit crap. Or Spinball, but there's a Sonic Pinball game with the same name, so don't think I can use that. I've got some ideas for how I'd like to continue this project if I get time, such as adding a bigger level or having some sort of procedural level design with kind of like a boss enemy at the end that you have to get through to, almost like a mini 1-level roguelike. All in all, this project was a huge amount of fun, and the initial 1-hour challenge was a great experience. And because of this, it led to this little game which I'm actually quite proud of now. I'd highly recommend giving the challenge a go for yourself, and who knows, maybe you will turn that idea into a 1-week project, or better yet, a 1-year project and sell it for a big dollar on Steam and become a millionaire. Or not. If you want to play any of the builds of Smiley Boy, a link to the itch page is in the description below. But for now, thanks for watching. If you liked the video, please let me know by attacking the like button, hit the sub button, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye! Hey!